Hi, I'm Mark Regev.
And I'm Ruthie Blum.
And welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And if you like our podcast, if you like our show, you should connect with jns.org. Connect. It's a good place to be.
Okay, Mark, so let's get to it. A lot of things happened this week. So what would you like to start with? Which topic would you like to start with today?
So I'll mention something that we spoke about before the broadcast. Yesterday there was a ceremony in Jerusalem, 10 years to the Protective Edge operation in Gaza, 2014. And it was a commemoration ceremony, a memorial ceremony for the people who fell in the operation. 75 people lost their lives on the Israeli side, 70 soldiers, 5 civilians. And there was the formal ceremony. The President of Israel was there, the Prime Minister of Israel was there, to recognize and remember those who fell in combat in that operation. And I saw that there were some of the families, some people there used it as an opportunity to protest against the Prime Minister. And of course, Israel's democracy and people can protest, and that's their right, and that's their obligation in a democracy. Protest is part of the freedoms that we enjoy. And of course, I can't feel the pain that these people feel. I didn't lose a son or a daughter in 2014 during that operation. But I nevertheless believe that it was a mistake and it is wrong to use a memorial event for political purposes. I mean, ultimately, of the 70 soldiers who lost their lives in Protective Edge, I mean, there were obviously some of them were religious and some of them were secular and some of them were from the left and some of them were from the right and probably some of them liked Netanyahu and probably some of them didn't like Netanyahu. But I think it's not respectful to the passing to try to turn that sort of event into a political event and yelling at the Prime Minister and so forth. Now, I know that when we had a different Prime Minister, Mr. Bennett, there were similar examples of people who disliked him politically using such events. I opposed it then, I oppose it now. I think it's wrong to take a national memorial event and turn it into something that is partisan political.
Well, surprise, surprise, Mark, I actually agree with you for once. Not only for once, but I actually do agree with that. Furthermore, I'm not even sure I understood what the main father who was yelling at this event, not even sure exactly what his complaint was because, yes, his son fell 10 years ago. But I will say, to tie this into the current war in Gaza, it's one thing if what you were saying is, it's your fault that we didn't finish the job 10 years ago. And it's another to say it's your fault that we fought in Gaza. I'm not quite sure what the complaint was other than that his son was killed, which is a tragedy. All right. I had kids in that war 10 years ago also. But here's the point. When Netanyahu, in the very beginning of this current war, Netanyahu said, he made a statement, he said, I knew back then that Hamas was ISIS. And I remember thinking, you shouldn't say that, because if you knew then that Hamas was ISIS, where have we been all these years? Not to mention the fact that that wasn't the last time we had a war in Gaza, or mini war, all right? Now, 10 years ago, that war was considered by Israeli standards incredibly long. It was 50 days long before the ceasefire agreement. Now, but I was told by everybody, what, are you kidding me? We wouldn't have been able to finish off Hamas or the tunnels or the Gaza being a terror enclave then, because we wouldn't have had the legitimacy neither at home nor internationally. And I say to you, Mark, I am tired of hearing that. We always have to be slaughtered and raped, beheaded, and killed in order to have justification to defend ourselves. We let this happen in other major wars, and I'm sick of it because you know what? This time we did have quote unquote legitimacy. Is the world more on our side? No. The world maybe we used to think loves dead Jews, so that's okay. The world doesn't even love dead Jews anymore. So I'm sick of it, and I think if we need to finish a job, we should finish it.
So I think it's more complicated. Obviously.
Naturally.
Obviously, when we fight these wars, it's better to have international support, specifically American support. And in 2015, you will recall, we had a testy relationship with the American administration under Barack Obama. And I think to calculate into the way you're planning your policy and your approach, you have to calculate in. It doesn't mean it's the be-all and end-all, but you have to. It's an obligation to calculate in what would the impact be of your relationship with the United States. But I think what you haven't talked about, and maybe is more important, is the internal Israeli aspect. Because since October 7th, Israel's been paying a high price for this war in Gaza. Not 50 days as Protective Edge was. It's been going on now we're getting close to 300. And the number of soldiers we're losing, I mean, every second day we have on the radio or the television, they're telling us the names of someone who's fallen in battle. And it's difficult. And I would ask you the following question. Today, Israeli society understands that we've got to end Hamas rule in Gaza. This can't go on, right? And we have to fight. It's the only way we're really going to put the pressure on to get our hostages back, to get a deal if we can get a deal. In 2014, 10 years ago, was the Israeli public ready to pay such a price? Was it ready for the sort of losses that we're taking now on the battlefield? Was it ready for the sort of national effort that the current war is requiring? I think the answer is in 2014, it wasn't ready. It required the massacre of October 7th for the Israeli public to be ready to pay the price, the sort of prices we're paying for today. A bit like, Pearl Harbor, America needed a reason. Roosevelt wanted to go in and support the Allies in the Second World War, but he needed Pearl Harbor to happen before he could mobilize America to fight the war.
Okay, but the fact is that all of these years, Hamas has been building up its arsenal with the help of, or the, let's say, turning a blind eye on the part of Egypt, amassing rockets, weapons, more terrorists, and massive tunnels. Now, don't tell me then, at the time, we said, well, we basically took care of the tunnels. Apparently, we did not. Not only did we not take care of the tunnels that existed then, but we allowed for many, many more tunnels to be built. Now, you say we wouldn't have had legitimacy because the public was not aware or was not made aware of the kind of threat it was. Now, which public was aware? All of the kibbutzim in southern Israel. These people were being bombarded by rockets all the time. Okay, the rest of us maybe were living our lives in the center of the country and even in the north for the most part. And these people were being bombarded by rockets all the time, and it was as though, well, they don't really count because they live along the border. And this brings me to the responsibility of our military and our military intelligence, which we saw failed abysmally on October 7th, but not only on October 7th. Prior to, there were concrete plans by Hamas and training sessions by Hamas to commit the October 7th massacre. We were asleep, or we were, as we say, we were involved in some kind of concept about how Hamas was deterred. Now, what I'm saying to you is, if 10 years ago we had been made to understand what the actual threat was, maybe the Israeli public would have given it legitimacy. I don't know, because it is true. We tend to always, our default position, the Jews' default position is to say, let's have peace. And if not peace, let's have peace and quiet.
I think it was a choice to let's sort of keep peace and quiet. Retrospectively, one can look back at the decisions taken over the past decade and one can be critical. But I think one has to ask the following question. Had we in 2015 launched the sort of war which we were forced to launch in 2023, with the sort of casualties and the costs economically and the total mobilization to achieve victory, would there have been an understanding and a backing for that? Because when you say there's a threat on the other side of the border, so there's a threat from Iran, there's a threat from the north. I mean, there's always threats. The question is, how do you manage those threats? How do you calibrate those threats? And I think in a democratic country, as America learned in Vietnam, yes, when you're going into a war, it's very important to have support for the price that you need to pay. And there's not a war that's fought without losing people. You said something that made me tick a moment ago when you said maybe people around the world, they don't like dead Jews. Yes, there's, and even that's not enough sometimes to justify an Israeli response.
Yeah.
I remember when I was the ambassador in the UK, you used to have these National Holocaust Day events. I remember there was one that even Jeremy Corbyn went to. He was very sad at the Jews who were killed in the Second World War, yes? And I think there's probably similar things going on in other European countries. I think there's no doubt that there's something in Western history, Western civilization that sees the Jews as the victim. That's our natural place. And maybe that's a problem that some people have with Zionism. Because what is Zionism basically? Zionism is Jews saying, we refuse to be the victim any longer. We refuse. We will stand up and defend ourselves. We will be independent. We will be strong. We will be sovereign. We have played the victim too long. We want to play a different part now. And I think when you look at a lot of progressive anti-Zionism or anti-Zionism as a whole, they have a problem with the idea. I mean, the Jews were supposed to be part of the oppressed, yes, part of the victims. That's why everyone can unite around on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And they have a problem uniting around Israel.
Yeah, well, they also have a problem uniting around other Jews, not just Israel, but Jews, because Jews have been successful in all the countries they immigrated to, or live in, or born in. And that's a no-no, okay, because it's really easy to punch up. You don't like to punch down, you'll punch up. But here's the thing, Israelis, this is the trouble with the Israeli left, which is very similar to the left outside of Israel. You have really two camps. There are many more than two camps in Israel because, as you know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But I would say if you wanted to oversimplify, there's the camp that thinks that peace is a goal, and the other camp that says peace can never be the goal. Peace is the byproduct of victory and strength. And this is an ongoing fight in this country and has been since the establishment of the state, even when the left was very militant, you could say, or, hawkish. And this is our problem now. And this I want to bring to why I think we have a serious problem with our generals, with the high-ranking military people, not the soldiers. They are amazing. They're heroes. They're wonderful. They're doing a great job. But the top brass has become like first of all, way too dovish for my purposes, because they're the military. I don't need a dovish military, It's fine. You want to be a dove in academia and in a think tank, go right ahead. These generals, many of whom end up at think tanks, where they then express, and are doing it now, the former ones, are on TV, talking about how there is no such thing as victory over Hamas and things like that, and it does a lot of damage. But I'm talking about the ones who are in their positions right now. And I want to tell you, when you and I worked together at the Prime Minister's office and in the Public Diplomacy Directorate, we worked with someone who was one of the spokespeople, Avi Hyman, and he used to say to me all the time, whenever I would express opinions to him off on the side, not publicly, I would say things that I didn't agree with or whatever, and he would always say to me, Ruthie, stay in your lane. And that was our ongoing thing, Ruthie, stay in your lane. Now, that's true. I agreed with him. You have to stay in your lane. Although I said to him, listen, in private, in private, there are no lanes, okay? Now, we have a situation here where we have a whole military establishment that doesn't stay in its lane. And its lane is fighting and winning wars. And it's become this kind of like a peace camp. No, we have to talk about the day after. No, we can't defeat Hamas. And no, Hamas is an ideology. We have our own idea of spokesman giving interviews to the foreign press saying that. And I want to say to him, you shut up. You win the war. You let other people worry about that. We have a similar thing with our courts. They intervene where they don't belong. We have a country now that is in desperate need of having everyone, including all the ministers, stay in their lane.
So about generals. You find generals across the political spectrum, and generals have different opinions, often based on where they came from in Israel, where their families were, and so forth. And there are, of course, generals on the left, and there are some generals on the right, maybe more on the left. There is a question, though, that I think needs to be asked. It's a more general question. And I remember when Sharon was elected in 2001, I was the spokesman of the Israeli embassy at the time in Washington, and I remember American opinion was, here's this guy, this guy who loves war and thinks their solution to every problem is to shoot first and ask questions later. That was his reputation at the beginning. And everyone remembered Sabra and Shatila. That's what he was infamous for, yes? But let's be frank. Sharon would sit and tell people that people who have fought in wars, and I think Netanyahu was the same. He lost his brother at Entebbe, obviously, and he himself was a soldier in an elite combat unit. I think people who have fought in wars know better than anyone else the price that is paid for victory, the prices that are paid for a successful military operation, even when you win, not one that you lose. The young men and women who die, the soldiers who don't come back, the soldiers who are crippled, either physically or psychologically afterwards. When you've seen your friends killed in battle, it has to affect you. And I think that military leadership, I want them to be committed to winning, but that they should be cautious on how they use the lives of our young soldiers who are ultimately doing their national service and doing what the country's asked them to do. I'm actually happy that our civilian and military leadership is very, very sensitive to the lives of our soldiers. You, as a mother of an Israeli reserve soldier, surely you are happy that our leadership is very cautious in the way that it looks at losing our soldiers in combat.
Yeah, well, that has nothing to do with staying in your lane. Yes, we have a leadership that's cautious. Yes, everybody who fought in wars knows how awful it is. And by the way, no Israeli, no Jew ever wanted a war. Wars are always imposed on us. Violence has always been imposed on us. So the question is not whether war is bad. The question is how you prevent the next one. And you don't prevent the next one by having generals tell you that actually there isn't really such a thing as victory. And really, we prefer agreements. Now, there is such a thing as a genuine peace agreement, but most of the ones we have signed with our enemies are not genuine, not on the part of our enemies. And that is the point. The other point is, if the generals, if you have the chief of staff of the army and you have the defense minister, it is their job and it is their right behind closed doors to express their opinions and to determine whether they have the capability of victory or if they have enough weapons or whatever. This is not the same as going on television and telling the world, especially our enemies, what we're not capable of doing or what our ideas are about it. That is, in my view, a total crime, and it shouldn't be permitted. Now, sometimes there are leaks from these private meetings, and that's a different issue. But I'm not talking about leaks. I'm talking about these open discussions on the part of people. Well, I want to say to them, your job, listen, I feel that way about our finance minister. You worry about finances. I feel that way about the education minister. I feel that way. We have a crossing of lanes in this country that has gotten so out of hand. Everybody just wants to talk about politics. Now, politics, by the way, shouldn't be a dirty word, because when we vote for someone, if we voted for this government, or people who didn't vote for the government, when you vote for a government, it has to do what you wanted it to do. And therefore, politics is an integral part of it. And that's why it's not a dirty word. But on the part of military guys, no, I just want to hear from you publicly how you intend to kill the enemy. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut.
So obviously, militaries in all countries have their professional responsibilities, and they should tell the leadership how they see things. But it's clear that the difference between a democracy and a military dictatorship, one of those South American, they used to be all over Latin America, yes, military juntas, yes?
Yeah.
In a democracy, the civilian leadership decides.
Exactly.
As part of the national security decision-making process, they have to be there, they have to make their opinions, but it's ultimately the job of the elected leadership to make the rules.
Well, somebody ought to tell them that. Okay.
The point is taken. But you talked about peace. So I think we have to be clear. Israel has to be strong. Israel has to be strong, and we've said this before on this podcast. Israel has to be strong militarily and economically and diplomatically and socially. We need to be strong because we live in a tough neighborhood. And there's no, there's no being nice to the weak. You've got to be strong. The Jews, as we said a moment ago, the Jews were too long were not strong. They couldn't defend themselves. My father was born in Magdeburg, Germany in 1931, yes? A bad place and a bad year to be born a Jew. And then the Jews were defenseless. We were stateless. We begged people to protect us, and unfortunately, most didn't. And today we're independent and we're strong. That's a good thing. And ultimately, peace with our neighbors comes from the fact that we are strong. Peace with our neighbors comes from the fact that we can defend ourselves. Peace with our neighbors comes from their understanding that Israel is here to stay. Now, I'm like most Israelis today. I don't see a chance for some sort of peace agreement with the Palestinians anytime soon. Not because of us, but because of them, obviously. But I do think those opportunities that before October 7th were becoming prevalent in the Arab world, more and more Arab countries wanting to follow in the pathway of the Abraham Accords, I think when this is over, we can return to peacemaking with the Arab countries, and maybe one day in the future, the Palestinians will also be a little less extreme and will become partners in peace. At the moment, I don't see it.
Not in your and my lifetime, but all right, okay. Fair enough. It's possible. It could happen. Here's the thing, though. We have a situation right now where we have our Prime Minister, who I think, thankfully, has been really tough on saying that the deal to release the hostages and temporary ceasefires in order to accomplish this, that there are red lines that cannot be crossed. And one of them is that Israel has to retain control over the Philadelphia corridor. And lo and behold, we have a defense minister and other military people, getting back to that issue, who say, no, we don't really have to. We don't have to have presence there. We can have high-tech there. We can have sensors above ground and walls below ground, and I don't know, all kinds of things that I thought that on October 7th, when we saw that technology did not help us against a bunch of primitive terrorists who just shot down this camera, that sensor, and broke through a fence with a tractor that could have been made out of Lego, okay? So I'm sorry, you cannot leave and another thing is the idea that, well, Egypt can police that border. Really? Egypt enabled all of the materials that, to build the tunnels with, to go through, and the weapons, and this. You can't trust Egypt, and Egypt will not help a single Gazan, will not hospitalize the Gazans, will not take them in. Again, we're the evil people. But what I would like to see is at least a uniformity of our government in the face of this stuff. And we don't have that. And thank God that Netanyahu is withstanding, because you know what? It's bad enough that he has to withstand pressure from Washington and everywhere else. But from his own people?
I would agree with you in part only, and that would be to say the following. Let's say I'm a general, and I sincerely believe that through other means we can safeguard the border between Gaza and in Egypt. Okay. The minute you say so publicly, you're actually maybe weakening the negotiating hand of the Prime Minister, because Hamas is negotiating tough.
Totally weakening
You've got to be negotiate tough back. And if Netanyahu wants to make that concession sometime in the negotiations, he can hear privately what is our red lines and what the military can or can't do. But the idea that you say it publicly and then it's not even a concession,
but you see, they do that on purpose. That's the point, okay? So it's not just that they're saying it in public, which they are, and it's not just that they are not staying in their lane, which they're not. It is that they're doing it on purpose to weaken Netanyahu. And how we know this is if they really believe that it's okay, that they can handle it, anything they can handle, if they believed it, they have every opportunity to be laying out plans, to be showing their tech, to do it in front of Netanyahu and everybody else in the cabinet, and not just Netanyahu, of course not. He's not the king, he's the prime minister, showing it to him, proving it to him, and keeping that under wraps. The worst thing you can do is tell the enemy, okay, well, we don't really need to be there. Second of all, we are in a negotiation right now. I got to tell you, I wouldn't let any of these guys talking like that, I wouldn't let them buy a car for me, all right? This is the most horrific thing. And unfortunately, the poor families of the hostages, which we don't know how we would react, okay, if our family members or my daughter were in there being raped and God knows what. But they are being tortured a second time by the illusion or the fantasy that the issue here is that Netanyahu doesn't want them back, the hostages back, and therefore, if he only just agreed to whatever, they'd come back. It's not true. And the lies that are being spread, they're subversive and they are cruel. And I honestly don't know what to do about it, because it's not just that Netanyahu wants the hostages home. Forget even that. The point is that Hamas doesn't want to return the hostages. Hamas doesn't want to relinquish its power in Gaza. And Hamas certainly doesn't want to cede power over the Philadelphia corridor. So, I don't understand how any Israeli, including ones with hostages in Gaza, how they don't see it.
So Netanyahu has that on his plate, obviously. And this coming week, he's got on his plate as well this visit to Washington, which is his first visit to Washington since he returned to office, a year and a half ago now already?
Yes.
Maybe more. And he'll be addressing a special joint session of
Congress, and it's the fourth time.
The fourth time. He's the first leader to do it. He's passed. Churchill did it 3 times. He's doing it now for a fourth.
Right.
He'll also be meeting with the President of the United States, the White House. That's been announced.
Yes.
And I suppose I should ask you, Ruthie, do you think he should meet Trump too?
Oh, I have mixed feelings about that. I would say, I don't know if it makes that much of a difference on either side of the ocean. In other words, let's suppose he met Trump and Trump lost the election or won the election, or Netanyahu lost his next election. I'm not sure it it will have an electoral effect. What might be good about it would be to, let's say, smooth over a slight tiff. I know that Trump was very irritated with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu congratulated Biden when he won the presidency, which was silly on Trump's part because, of course, Netanyahu had to do that. I think a good sign is that when Netanyahu expressed on Twitter, he expressed his concern for Trump after the assassination attempt, that Trump actually reposted it on his own Truth Social. So that is an indication that he's saying, you know what, let's bury the hatchet. The thing, though, is, should Netanyahu be going at all to address Congress right now when there are still hostages in Gaza? And with Biden, you know, all the news now is focused on, well, it's now focused on the assassination attempt, but right up into that moment, it was focused on Biden's cognitive impairment and whether the Democrats are going to be able to get him to resign before the Democratic convention next month. And would it be wise? Is it wise for Netanyahu to go and then
of course
bring
it is.
Israel back into the headlines when it was sort of nice that we were kind of outside?
I think it's important that he goes. And his critics have made comparisons with 2015 when
Which
he
was
went,
excellent.
which was when he went to talk about the Iranian deal.
Exactly.
This time, it's important to remember that he was invited by both the Republican and Democratic sides of the House. It was Charles Schumer and the Mitch McConnell, and in the House, it was the Democratic speaker together with the Republican speaker together with the minority leader and so forth. So it was very bipartisan. I don't believe the Democrats would have invited the congressional Democrats without a green light from the White House. And then, of course, the White House announced his meeting then. I think, and I'm giving my opinion and my opinion alone, I think if there is an opportunity to meet Trump, he should do it. And I'll give you an example why. I remember I'm old enough to remember. You're obviously not, Ruthie, but I'm old enough to remember that in 1992, a newly elected Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, went to Washington for meetings with George H.W. Bush. They actually met in, I don't know how to pronounce that place in Maine, Kennebunkport. Thank you, I apologize. And then he incidentally met, and then everyone said George H.W. Bush is a sure thing, he's going to win. He shouldn't meet anyone on the Democratic side, it'll just make him look, you know. He met this unknown governor from Arkansas, a certain Clinton apparently, and apparently that was a good meeting. And I think it's the Prime Minister's responsibility, if there is an opportunity, that he should meet with Trump. If Rabin can do it, he can do it. And I think it's also very, very important that he goes, that he says his message to the members of Congress, that he meets the president. I think it's an important visit. It's part of Israel's diplomatic strength. The fact that this is his fourth time is a demonstration of Israeli diplomatic strength. And I think when we meet next week, he'll already be there. And I hope he has a good visit.
Well, when we meet next week, he will be in Washington right before he gives his address. During the time-wise, because of the 7-hour time difference. Now, I want to just say one thing about his address into 2015. And by the way, before you kept mentioning 2015 as the war in Gaza, but that was 2014.
Yes.
So his speech to Congress in 2015, a lot of people then also said, what is he going there for? Because our election, the Israeli election, was happening very soon afterwards, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that after that. There was a carry-on, and he went and he gave a fantastic speech against the Iranian nuclear deal. It was an appeal not to sign a bad deal. And, of course, it didn't work. In other words, America signed the bad deal. But what did work was that speech led directly to the Abraham Accords.
Correct.
5 years later, because the Gulf states were so blown away that Netanyahu stood up to Obama, the president of the United States, and said his thing about it against Iran.
Even more so. The Arab leaders said to him, you are speaking not just for Israel, you're speaking for the region.
Well, exactly. So that led to the Abraham Accords, which is why we now know in retrospect. At the time, I also supported his going there. Not because I really thought that Congress was then going to vote against the deal, but it was very important to have that on record. And now the question is, okay, so what's the purpose of this one? He's already said you withheld weapons and we need your weapons, right? He's already made that speech. We've already seen what happened with Iran when Iran attacked Israel. So the question is this going to be an appeal to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages? I don't know. What we do know, speaking of which, by the way, at the Republican National Convention, they said a prayer for the hostages. Okay, we're not supposed to be partisan and politically partisan, especially not in the United States, because although I'm from the United States, I'm really Israeli. But I will say one thing: after these years of this attitude towards Israel on the part of the Democrats, and then you have Republicans who are. One of the reasons that the Republicans are considered so backward, it's like in Israel, because they said something religious. They prayed to God and they invoked the Bible and all that. And in Israel, when you do that, it's like, oh my God, there they go, those messianic religious people. It was a breath of fresh air. They prayed for the hostages, which, by the way, can't hurt. That's for sure.
Of course it can't hurt. Netanyahu, I think, will use his speech to Congress to remind America why America stands with Israel. Because a lot of people say, well, that's the tradition, we support the... But they don't... He will re-articulate and remind them why Israel is right, that we are defending ourselves, what is the basis of the strong bond between the two countries. And the truth is, and I think even his political critics will admit, that no one does a better job at that, as presenting Israel's case aboard than Netanyahu has done. And he's done it many times. Ruthie, we'll have to wait and see what happens next week. But until then, I wish you a good week and look forward to seeing you again.
I do too. And again, I'd like to reiterate that you should like and subscribe to our program, to JNS TV and jns.org.
Thank you, Ruthie.
Thanks, Mark.